Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Superhuman Podcast. I am your host, Renato Capasso, and together we will talk about the latest biohacks and scientific discoveries that will turn you from a human into a superhuman. And it all starts now. Hello my dear Biohack friend, and welcome to a new episode of the Superhuman Podcast. Today, I am very pleased to have on the show Kayla Osterhoff. She's one of my absolute favorite biohackers, and she's an health scientist specialized into brain and brain health. We will talk about brain in a way that you have probably never seen before. We're gonna discuss how the brain is your hardware and your mind is your software. But also, obviously, we're going to discuss about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis and how you can, what they are, first of all, and how you can improve and increase neuroplasticity and how you can simulate and trigger neurogenesis. Then we're going to talk about conscious mind versus subconscious mind. And this is the part of this podcast, of this particular episode, that you're going to absolutely love. We're going to also obviously talk about hacks, about how to hack your conscious and subconscious mind and also subconscious behavior. Of course, devices, biohacks, tips, we're not missing this episode. So this is an episode all about the brain and the mind. So please stay tuned and follow this episode until the end, because I can guarantee it's going to be worth it. Enjoy the episode with Kayla Osterhoff. And let me say that I'm very excited to have you here. We've been talking for a while, and we've been trying to do this for a while, but recently you've been publishing some things on your Instagram page that all your content is very fascinating, but the last topics that you've been publishing it lately, they were so fascinating. I said, okay, I really want to speak with Kayla. I really want to speak with her now. And you know, when I do podcasts, I'm pretty much very selfish. When I want to know more about a topic, I'll try to get the person who I think knows the best about the topic, and that's why I wanted to call you. But you way more than that. Like, I was reading your bio last week, and you know, I said I could summarize it in a couple of sentences, but I cannot. So because it's so long. So I'll let you do the introduction for people who are listening. Who is Kayla?
So, thank you, first of all, so much for having me on. And I've really been looking forward to this episode and our conversation. Like you've mentioned, we have been talking for ages now as friends and colleagues who are interested in the same things and fellow podcast hosts. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation. And thank you again for inviting me on your show. You're right. I probably need to figure out a short version of my bio that can capture it all. I guess that's my new challenge. But my background is varied across the health sciences. I have a bachelor's in health ecology, and while I was in undergrad and halfway through my master's program, I worked in physical therapy. And from there, I really learned a deep understanding of the body and the mechanisms of movement and the importance of taking care of the health of the physical body. From there, I went on to get my master's in public health. And so that's all about behavioral health science. And I was able and very fortunate to be able to apply that when I worked for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for several years after that. And during that time, I was able to work on the emergency responses that were going on during those 7 years, including the Zika response. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
That and the microcephaly thing that we were dealing with at the time. I worked on that response, and then I worked on the Ebola response in several capacities, both of them. And then I worked on the coronavirus response just briefly before I left last year to focus solely on my personal health optimization medicine practice and my studies in my current PhD program, which is in neuropsychophysiology.
Nice.
And so this is the basis for a lot of my content recently, really pulling in the neuroscience and the science of the subconscious mind and translating that science into a digestible way where people can get little kind of neuroscience lessons in a bite-sized modality.
Oh my gosh. How old are you, Kayla?
I'm 33.
Okay, we're the same age. No, because, if you didn't look that young from the bio, I would say you're like 65 or something. From the bio, right? From the look, it's like...
I feel like I've lived a couple of lifetimes already. I've had so many learnings along the way, and I feel like I've been 10 different people just in the last 10 years. So I definitely feel that.
Yeah, that's good. And to be honest, that's why I'm happy to interview people like you, people like Sean, and so on. Is for me, in this podcast, it's not just about the knowledge and the degrees and the bio. I really value a lot two things additionally to the content that people can provide. One is the energy and the passion that people have. There are some great people. Sometimes I receive outbound requests of people who want to be on the podcast, but I haven't not followed that work, and I don't know if they have passion for what they do or not. And another skill, and I think you are honestly, I mean the top on this. This is a very good skill on translating in very simple terms something that can be very complex into something very simple. And this is the one of the main reasons why I was so fascinated about that post where you made a comparison to the brain from brain as a software and as in hardware. I did love that post, and I like to share that in this podcast into more details. I'd like to ask you. We all know why brain health is so important. We all know, right? Brain health is so important. But why is that into more details? And I'd love you to also explain for people who didn't see the post and who are listening, your comparison of brain as a software and as a hardware.
Yes, of course. I love to talk about this topic, and so thank you for allowing me to do so and get a little nerdy with you here. And translating science is also one of the things that I love to do. So what you were referring to is something that I like to call the human operating system. And so the human operating system is what is responsible for creating our bio-individual reality. So I say that reality is bio-individual because each person's version of reality, the way that they perceive their human experience, is different than any other person because it is completely bio-individual based on the status of their human operating system. So the human operating system, you can think of that as like the computer of the human, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think of that as the computer of the human, then you can think of the brain is actually the hardware. So the brain is the physical, tangible construct. It is both neurochemical and electrical in nature. And so the brain you can think of as like the computer that you're looking at right now. Yeah. It is the piece that you can touch and feel. And the software of the human operating system, so the other component is the mind. Okay. And more specifically, it is the subconscious mind. So the software of the human operating system, you can think of that as like the invisible programs that run on the hardware, right? Mm-hmm. So if the brain is the hardware, the physical piece, and the mind, the thoughts, beliefs, and emotions are the invisible programs that run on the hardware, then you can start to understand how the human operating system works. And so the software, the mind, is more of the physiological association, whereas the brain is more of the neurological association. But the two together are what interact and manifest physically in the body through the nervous system, right?
And
so,
no, like I have a question. Obviously, it's important to if you would have to, if someone is starting out, and probably you're gonna go through this already, but if someone is starting out, so obviously for what you said is I think based on what you said, that to allow the software to run properly, I need somehow to upgrade the hardware. So do you reckon the hardware will be the starting point? If someone is starting and they want to upgrade the brain, right? And they want to be a better human being and start with the brain. What would be the starting point for you? The hardware, so the physical brain, or the software?
So I think both are equally as important. And if there was a more simple starting point, then I would say it's the brain, the physical hardware, right? So both together need to be in a healthy place for you to have a healthy version of reality, a healthy human experience. So essentially, if the mind or the brain component of this human operating system are dysfunctional, then reality, the perceived reality, the human experience, is also probably going to be dysfunctional. So if we look at the upgrades that we can make to our hardware, right, to the neurological, to that physical brain component, then we are looking at two specific pathways to do this.
Yes.
So one is through neuroplasticity, and the second one is through neurogenesis.
Okay.
So neuroplasticity means how moldable is your brain. Like, it is fascinating, this field of science that has only come to be in the past 10 years or less, where we figured out that the brain is actually moldable. You can actually change the shape of your brain, meaning changing the neural pathways. And we'll get more into that in a minute. But the other pathway is neurogenesis. Now, that is different than neuroplasticity, though both are benefits to upgrading the system. Neurogenesis means growing new neurons. And again, this is so fascinating and something that I love to study, because up until 10 years ago, even neuroscientists believed that human adults, only had a finite number of brain cells. Now we know that that is absolutely not true, and that adults can grow new neurons. And so that is amazing, and there are ways that we can trigger this process.
Oh, that's amazing. I remember I remember that very clearly on science class. I remember it was secondary school or high school. Yeah, but that was like exactly this phrase. When you are an adult, you have limited amount of neurons, and once once a neuron die, it will never come back, right? Because those are demands on neurons or neurons. And I was thinking, I said, oh, damn it. So, like I'm basically going to become dumber and dumber every year as an adult if I lose neurons. But that's not the case. And do you know what was the tripping point that made, how do we find, like, why neuroscientists before could not figure out that neurons could regenerate, and now they can? Just a matter of technology?
Yeah. Well, here's the really cool thing about neuroscience, and the reason why I'm in this field is because I like new things. But in the field of neuroscience, when we're looking at the brain, you can consider the brain is kind of like the ocean on Earth. We've only explored about 2% of its capacity, right? So we don't fully understand how, why, and what the brain is. However, we have some working principles, and we've figured some of it out through biochemistry, neurochemistry, all these things. However, we still don't know we don't know everything. And the mind is even more esoteric. The mind is really hard to put your finger on. And, you know, the field of psychology even does not fully understand the mind. And actually, one of the biggest questions, scientific questions that remains to be answered of the 21st century is how the brain produces the mind. But the reason why that question is unanswered is, one, because we don't fully understand these two constructs. And two, is that the brain does not produce the mind. And the mind does not produce the brain. It's not a linear pathway. It's a bidirectional pathway. The two interact to create our consciousness, our human experience, but the brain does not produce the mind.
That's great. And I have a question as a biohacker. I like to be very practical on certain things, and probably you were going to go there anyway. Specifically on, I'm gonna jump back on neurogenesis. And it's true, right? Like you said, even I've done a couple of episodes, even with Inka, she was saying that, you know, the brain is very hard to study, to get in and study. So we have the natural capability of regenerate neural cells, but obviously, can we somehow? I didn't want to say biohack, but I'm going to say biohack that
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll share 3 of my favorite neurogenesis biohacks.
Okay.
And these are just the most simple biohacks that you can do that are going to boost neurogenesis or help to trigger that process or support that process, right? So this is going to help you to be able to create new neurons. So the first one is to increase growth factors.
Okay.
So what I mean by growth factors are BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or nerve growth factor, NGF. These are the 2 that are referenced in the literature. And the easiest way to do this is by using your metabolism to produce the factors through aerobic exercise or fasting. So you can increase those growth factors by the aerobic metabolic process. And so you can do that by doing aerobic exercise or through intermittent or long-term fasting. These are 2 pathways to really boost those growth factors in the brain. The second one is to provide your brain with the building blocks for neurons, right? So the building blocks of neurons, a lot of it comes down to fatty acids. So fatty acids are incorporated into not only the neuronal membrane, so the covering of the cell, right, or the outer lining of the cell, but it's also a very important part of the myelin sheath that covers the actual neuron axons. So the axons that reach off the neuron, and the communication goes through the axon to another neuron, and that's how you have neural networks, and that's really what a neural pathway is. So you have to have healthy cell membranes and myelin sheaths so that you can have healthy communication of your brain. And the way to create that is to provide the building blocks. So to that end, choline is another great supplement that you can take that is involved in the biosynthesis of phospholipids. So again, these phospholipids are very important to create the membrane and the myelin sheath of the neuron. And the last one is folate. Is a great supplement that you can take. And this is involved in the DNA and RNA synthesis of our neurons. So those are 3 pretty easy nutritional hacks that you can do to provide the building blocks. And then the final way that I like to biohack neurogenesis is to create eustress or positive stress, right? So there's a difference between distress and eustress. Distress is damaging and inflammatory, whereas eustress creates a hormetic change. So it creates a positive biological change. And so this could be anything like exercise, which we know promotes neurogenesis by increasing growth factor, but negative stress, like that causes oxidative stress, like emotional stress, really inhibits neurogenesis, and it can actually kill your brain cells. So avoiding that negative type of stress and increasing eustress will help you to boost your neurogenesis.
How do we increase eustress?
So forms of eustress are things like exercise, fasting, cold thermogenesis, different things that create positive changes in your body, in your biology. And then negative forms of stress that we would want to avoid or remove if we can are, things like blue light exposure at night, or things that like emotional stressors that will really wear us down over time, working, 10-hour days and not getting enough sleep. These are all forms of negative stress, distress that we'd want to avoid.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm gonna open a quick bracket about the blue light, and I know people talk. Now is well known, and everyone has written. Dave Asprey started it, and now everyone talks about it, and it's true. And we all think that we know it, right? But still, we still don't apply it, and we still a lot of people still think, okay, it's just a blue light, I can do a bunch of stuff, but simply, I don't know, like, okay, Oura Ring, right? So I went to a place called Jervis Bay, 3 hours from the south, and it was a place there were there were no light at all, and the light in the house were very, very dim, not because it was wanted, just because the Airbnb was that way. And during that trip, we did all the wrong things when it comes to sleep. But just we avoided, exposure to blue lights and so on. And my sleep score went to 90 just for that. So it's that important. When people say, I can't sleep, what I need to do, what hacks, what pills, melatonin and so on. Sometimes it's just like avoid those lights, and it's very, very effective.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because, it is a form of distress. So when you start to remove these major stressors from your life, your sleep is going to be the first thing that benefits. And, sleep is actually a hack, one of the hacks that I use for both neurogenesis, but also neuroplasticity. Sleep is very important for neuroplasticity because sleep is when your glial cells, which are your immune cells of the brain, that is when they go around and they clean up your neural networks, meaning that they trim out, they prune, it's called neural pruning. They trim out the neural pathways that are not useful, redundant, or not used, right? And so that makes a cleaner pathway for your brain to choose the path of least resistance and use the least amount of energy. So it's more efficient. And this helps to create better connectivity between the different areas of the brain and better communication within the brain. So it's really, really important to get quality sleep because the neural pruning process only happens when we're sleeping.
That's so interesting. I have still on this. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
One is more of a curiosity that made me think while you were talking, and that regards senescent cells. Do we also? So, sorry, my cat is very difficult doing interviews.
I'm a cat person too.
I love her, but every time I do an interview, like, she's around me. And if I try to write show notes, I like to write show notes in pen and paper so I can remember them better rather than typing. You might have noticed I started typing before, but when I write, she thinks this is a toy.
She's like, oh, it's my time to play.
It's my time to play. So senescent cells, can neural cells become senescent cells? And if so, do you reckon that supplementing with a senolytic supplement can help brain health or ultimately neurogenesis. For those who don't know at home, senescent cells are those cells that just refuse to die. They have no use for the human body anymore. And instead they produce, like, let's say, harmful chemicals. And when we have too much senescent cells, getting rid of some of them, not all of them, because they have their own use, can be beneficial. And my question is, does that happen in the brain as well?
To my knowledge, it happens anywhere where there are cells, right? Oh, kitty. But whether that happens in abundance in the brain versus other tissues, I have not seen evidence for that. And I think it's kind of like the same idea with eustress and distress. And you described that beautifully, where you said, too many is harmful, but some can actually be beneficial. So it is that same stress concept of, it's really a balance of having enough, but not too many. And that's really the beauty of the entire organism of the human. It's all about balance. It's all about equal amount of contrast, right? Equal amount of this versus this versus this. And it's not really about being on one side of the spectrum or the other.
That's great. And I have another question regarding, and then I'll promise we'll move on. But I know people would think about those questions, or at least I do. So regarding, so to increase neurogenesis, you summarize these three big categories: increase growth factors, supplementing with building blocks, and then positive stress, which we talk about extensively as well. So to increase growth factor, you mentioned aerobic exercise and fasting. I believe mildly, in a way, can also count intermittent fasting. And if so, for people who do intermittent fasting, for people who don't know, intermittent fasting, you fast for 16 hours and then you eat for 8 hours, so more or less this window. If you take supplements that trigger sirtuins and things like this, could you potentially increase these growth factors? Let's say I do intermittent fasting, my last meal is at 8 p.m., then I eat at midday. Meanwhile, in the morning, I'll take resveratrol or similar things. Or could this supplementation increase the growth factor?
So not directly. However, those kinds of supplements can definitely boost neurogenesis because of the other reason that I mentioned. So, for instance, resveratrol is a very strong antioxidant. So if you can slow the process of oxidation, meaning you have less brain cells dying, then technically this helps with your regeneration process, right? But that being said, if you took supplements that alter your metabolic function, so if it made your metabolic rate increase, then technically, yes, that could increase growth factors. That isn't the way I would recommend to do it, and I don't think it would be as effective as just using something as simple as aerobic exercise or fasting. But yeah, technically, if it increases your metabolic rate, then it probably does increase growth factor.
That's amazing. Well, thank you. That I have a lot of homeworks to go through to increase neurogenesis. Now, neuroplasticity.
Yes.
So neuroplasticity. What's the benefits of having a better of neuroplasticity, and then maybe how do we hack that? How do we increase that?
Yeah. So neuroplasticity, for those who are not fully familiar with this subject, is the ability to reshape your brain. It's the ability to mold your brain in a way, as if your brain was clay, right? So this has to do with building new neural pathways. It has to do with removing redundant neural pathways and removing unwanted neural pathways, right? So that you create new dominant neural pathways for behaviors and different physiological responses that you want more of. So there are a few ways to hack neuroplasticity, one of which I mentioned is sleep, so that we can improve or enhance that neural pruning process, which is responsible for removing the neural pathways that we no longer want or use. So that's very important, and I can't stress that enough. But the biggest way to boost neuroplasticity is by having new experiences.
Okay.
Every time you experience something new, or even gain a new perspective on an experience you've had before, this triggers neuroplasticity, and it also triggers a new neural pathway. Now, that new neural pathway won't essentially become a permanent pathway or the dominant pathway right away, but over time, through my next hack, which is repetition, this is what reinforces new neural pathways. So if you want to create a new behavior, you reinforce those neural pathways by one, trying something new, and then reinforcing by repeating that behavior over and over until that becomes the dominant neural pathway. The brain is always looking for the path of least resistance, so it can utilize the least amount of resources so it can survive, right? And thrive. And so with that, it will always be looking for the dominant neural pathway. So the way I like to describe this is you can think of the neural pathways that you use, the ones that are very dominant for you right now, and the behaviors that you easily achieve every day, is you can think of those neural pathways as a well-worn river, like a big, great river, wherever you live in the world. You think of a large river that you have been to, and how hard would that be to reroute that river? Would it be real easy, or would it be pretty difficult?
Well, it would be pretty hard, I think, no?
Yeah, it would be pretty hard because the water is used to, and it's already got momentum to go down that well-worn path. Now, neuroplasticity helps you to create a new neural pathway, and then reinforcement is walking up and down that path over and over and over, or digging out that trench, digging, until the river is rerouted to take that pathway instead of the old one.
I love the comparison. And that made me think, for people who are thinking what can be the benefit out of it for them, and correct me if I'm wrong, could a pathway also be so let's say people who are more prone to be anxious regarding a stress, for example, public speaking. Okay, let's do a practical example, but it can be anything. People who tend to be nervous with public speaking, which, by the way, is the majority of people. Could that be connected to a neural pathway that can be, by giving the example of the river, can be directed into having a different reaction when you are in that type of scenario?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
It could be, well, it is definitely associated to a certain neural pathway that your body and your physiology is used to activating. And it definitely has to do with a subconscious program. So it's both. Okay. And we can get into that in a moment. Okay. But essentially, any behavior is linked to a neural pathway. So especially those behaviors or habits that we want to instill or that we want to change. Yeah. All of these are associated with the neural pathways, meaning neural networks that are activated, that communication is sent electrically through the myelin sheath covered axon to the next one. So that is essentially what a neural pathway is. But there are different ones that are associated with every behavior.
That's amazing. And why do kids? So obviously a child or a teenager would have an increase, would have a better neuroplasticity than an adult. Yes. Does it come down to just being a younger brain and not having enough neural pathway formed, or does it come down to more energy, or both, or something else? Why is that a child is more prone to develop a certain personality when he's a child or a teenager and not an adult? Why is it more difficult for an adult to build new neural pathways?
Yeah, so the answer to that is that the brain is not fully developed, right?
Okay.
So the brain is still growing, it's still creating neural pathways, and on the mind side, the subconscious mind is also still being developed. Some argue that this process happens between the ages of 0 and 8, and then some, looking at the neuroscience aspect and more holistic view, the brain is not fully formed until about mid-20s, about 24. So during that entire time, you're both creating the hardware and programming that software.
That's great. I remember when I was at uni, I remember this comparison about the brain stop growing when you are diminish the learning capability when you are 24. And I was like 23. I said, okay, I have one more year to finish my genetic exams and so on, because at 24 I want. No, that explains things a lot.
I have to say that that teaching and that belief, I would love to invite folks to question it, because I think that is another way to instill a negative subconscious program and a limiting belief, right? Is if you tell somebody that their ability to learn, their neuroplasticity or their subconscious suggestibility diminishes at age 24, that's really putting a ceiling and a limit on people. That is not necessarily fully true.
Well, what I can tell you that personally, I think my ability to learn has increased drastically now compared to when I was at uni. So to be honest, I don't believe it's true, or maybe it's partially true.
Good.
But yeah, like you said, right? Like the worst thing you can do is just make that as a certainty, and next time you do stuff, you say, okay, I'm over 24, my learning capabilities is diminished, and so on. So no, I agree on that. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, sure.
You guys don't know, but Kayla is seeing a tail.
Yes. I love it.
Yeah. She loves my standing desk. Okay, that's very interesting, and there is a lot of for people to do it. But could you tell me what could be an example of unwanted neural pathways?
Sure. So this goes back to that discussion around habits, right? So something like the propensity to be anxious is one. Something like the propensity to have an angry outburst or reaction, an anger issue, somebody could say, that would be associated with a neural pathway or network of pathways that you don't necessarily want. Late night snacking, anything like this, these things that you do that are kind of propelled, more obsessive type behaviors, and even just the behaviors that you're totally unaware of, like when something itches and you scratch it, all of these are neural pathways.
That's great. How do we know, how does the body know, or how can the body know that those are unwanted pathways?
Right. So you have to tell it.
Okay.
The body doesn't know that. The body doesn't know the difference, and the body doesn't define or label a neural pathway as a good or bad one. You have to do that consciously. And so we'll talk about the conscious and subconscious mind and how to navigate that construct in a moment. But the first step is to become self-aware, so that you can identify what behaviors and what subconscious programs are not working for you, right? So the subconscious program is linked to a behavior, is linked to a neural pathway that you may not want. And it's not as simple as a neural pathway. It's more of like a whole host of neural pathways, but we'll call it a neural pathway for this conversation. So the way to identify whether it is a good or a bad one and help your body to decide that it does not want to have that neural pathway anymore is, number one, become aware of it. So identifying the behaviors and the emotions and the reactions that you do not like or that you want to change. And then that is the starting point to changing the behavior. The next thing is to decide what your replacement behavior is going to be, the new neural pathway, right? Then you can utilize the science behind neuroplasticity to create and reinforce those new neural pathways to instill a new habit. And then over repetition, getting good sleep, sparking new thoughts, emotions, and experiences, this will help to solidify those new neural pathways that you are creating, or aka new behaviors. And so that is how you give your body the roadmap to decipher which ones to keep and which ones to get rid of. But the body in and of itself does not know the difference.
That's great. And by the way, while you were saying that, this is something that I believe everyone should focus on, right? Because we are in a world where everyone looks to improve themselves in any way possible. And I think I'm all about like anything that is passive in some ways to self-growth. And, you know, once you remove, I'm going to call them habits, right? But once you remove bad autonomous habits, and you replace them with new ones that, you know, after a while, once you do the groundwork, they act on autopilot. That is very powerful. It makes the difference from, I don't know, you're doing a public speaking and you need to do like breath work and talking with yourself, like, you know, for 20-30 minutes to making automatically. And that's just like a stupid example, but, you know, we could do, you know, and people can do their examples based on their own lives and so on. But I think this is something that everyone who is looking to self-grow should focus on, because it's one of the smartest way to become better at whatever goal you're trying to achieve.
Oh, absolutely. Get the body to work for you, not against you.
Yeah. Is there a way for us? And then, and I promise that's the last question. And then, because I want to focus a little bit on conscious and subconscious mind. That's very fascinating. But is there a way to, I don't know, I'll say like a chemical way through supplementation or external sources to make neuroplasticity more effective?
Technically, yes. And it's through regulation of your mood, your emotions, right? So serotonin is the star in terms of mood regulation.
Okay.
But dopamine is the reward pathway. So that's the one that we're like, ooh, yay. That's like the sugar and social media, checking messages or likes on social media. That's the dopamine pathway going like, ooh, yay, I'm happy. But the serotonergic system within the brain, that neurotransmitter system, is really responsible for what keeps our mood stable, right? So that's the star. That's the one that we want to promote. And you can do this through creating feelings that you want to feel more of, these positive feelings. So one way to do that is, when you're creating a new behavior, tie it to a positive emotion. One way that you can easily do that is to tie it to a feeling of gratitude, right? So even if you don't feel gratitude for the behavior that you're trying to instill, you can still think of something that you do feel grateful for and tie that feeling to the new behavior, so that you have this operant conditioning to go down that pathway, create that pathway, right? And operant conditioning is, I'm sure people have heard of Pavlov's dog, right? And so it's like, when Pavlov would feed his dog, he would always ring a bell at the time when the food came out. Over time, he removed the food didn't come out, and he just rang the bell, and the dog would still salivate, because the neural pathway was trained that the bell was tied to food. And so the dog thought, even when the bell was ringing and there was no food, it still had the same physiological response as if the food was there. So if we're looking at operant conditioning for a neural pathway, what we're looking at is tying a positive emotion, something that rewards us, right, to the behavior that we're trying to create, the new neural pathway that we're trying to create. And that will then enforce us to go down that pathway. It'll be the intrinsic motivator to make us want to repeat that behavior.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow. Thank you. What about the Halo device, like the headphones? Do you reckon they could what's your view about devices like this?
Yeah, I think like audio visual entrainment devices or like vibration types of devices can be used in the same exact way. So you can use for instance, you can tie like a gratitude practice with using like a sensate or some kind of vibration type device. And then now you've linked a physiological, like a sense, a feeling to an emotion, right? Now you've linked that to an emotion. Now every time you feel the vibration, you're going to get the same neurochemical reaction as you would just practicing gratitude. So you can do it that same way. So that's where I think those devices are useful, because they can be entrained and used as triggers for to reinforce behaviors.
That's great. And I'm gonna link any device or anything, any course, any book that you can think of in the show notes for people to look for. Now at the moment, I was honestly looking forward to conscious mind and subconscious mind.
Yeah. So I love talking about this. And again, now we're talking about the software of the human operating system, right? So we'll focus mostly on the subconscious mind because this is where the meat of the work needs to be done. So with the human consciousness, the mind, right? There are, again, two aspects. The conscious is the one that you and I are using right now. It is the one that we are fully in control of 100%. This is willpower, right? This is our ability to move forward. Now, the problem with that is that willpower is a very limited resource and it takes a lot of resources. And so we only have the capacity to be in the conscious mind for about 5% of our day, right? 5% of our time here on this earth. So out of 24 hours, only about 5% of that, you are actively in the conscious mind in 100% control in the driver's seat, right?
Wow.
Now, thank God for the subconscious mind, because if the rest of the 95% was just driven by who knows what, we'd probably perish, I'm sure. But we have the subconscious mind, which keeps us alive and going and utilizing those neural pathways to behave and act. So the subconscious mind is responsible for 95% of our behaviors throughout the day. Now, the problem here, we're very grateful for the subconscious mind, but it's a little bit of a pesky little subconscious mind because it was programmed mostly during our childhood. Okay. So that means that those programs are very outdated by this point. So if the programs that were installed were, let's say you're 60 years old, if that was 50 years ago, those programs are probably not serving you very well in your adult life. And that's the case for all of us, right? Some of the programs will, and a lot of them won't. And so the work here becomes becoming aware of programs that maybe are not beneficial, and then using things that can trigger subconscious suggestibility to bring that subconscious mind forward so that you can make alterations. But the subconscious mind likes to stay hidden. It likes to stay behind the scenes, and it's a little hard to put your finger on it. If it was very easy, we would all just reprogram our subconscious mind and live the most amazing lives and have everything that we wanted. But it's a little more hard than that, but it's not impossible. And it is very possible to change the subconscious mind.
That's amazing. And that was one of the things that blew my mind. And I do think that especially in science, even when things are known, every time people talk about the next breakthrough and so on. But I think sometimes it's very useful to remind to people, what are the basics and things that we should focus on. And, when you mentioned that 95% of our behavior is influenced by our subconscious mind, but the problem is that most of those behaviors are set when we were children. Do you know what I mean? That alone was mind-blowing. Like, there is so much growth potential there if you can somehow reprogram your subconscious mind, and that is so powerful, way better than any hacks that is out there, way better. This is very powerful stuff, and that's why I did love your post when you mentioned those things, because that has an impact on people. And but the question obviously arises is, okay, that is cool, and it is already right, just by the fact that people know that, is, like you said, self-awareness, just by the fact that people are self-aware of it is important. But how do we reprogram subconscious mind behavior that were established when we were children? I know that there are so many that probably I've done when I was a kid, that don't serve me anymore. Instead, they can be,
We all have it, right? It's not special to you or me. It's all of us. This is the human experience, right?
Yeah.
So the first step, as you mentioned, is self-awareness. That step can't be skipped. That step has to happen for you to be able to make changes. So that's step number one, though that's not the subconscious hack. We'll call them hacks, right? Subconscious reprogramming biohacks. But once you've done the work to identify the subconscious programs that you no longer want or no longer are serving you, and just to mention, take one step back, in order to identify what those are, the easiest way is to identify behaviors that you don't like, or thought processes or beliefs or emotions that you don't necessarily like or don't progress you towards your goals. And that is, then you dig deeper from there to find out, what is the subconscious programming that's driving this behavior? Is it a lack of safety, for instance? Or is it a lack of love? Whatever it may be that's driving it, it's really important to identify what that subconscious program is, and then what do you want to replace it with? Again, it's just like neuroplasticity. What do you want to replace it with? A thought, feeling, an emotion, and belief. These are what the subconscious mind is really made of. So identify, let's say, a thought that you want to change. So let's work with one that I've been working with myself personally. I actually posted about this today on Instagram. Is you have to work hard to succeed. Now, that's a thought that was programmed into me by my parents, because I grew up in a lower income family where you had to work hard to make money. That was the reality that we lived in. And that is what my parents instilled in me. And so I would always have this thought running in the background, a subconscious program that told me, you have to work hard to succeed. And so what did I do up until I was, 30 years old? I worked really hard and I did succeed, because that was my belief. Now I'm changing that belief structure. I'm changing that thought. I'm changing that thought from, I have to work hard to succeed, to success comes easy and with ease. And so that is the new thought process that I am instilling. So there are 3 ways to biohack this, and we can continue using this example. So one is repetition. It's the same hack as for neuroplasticity. So if I want to change this thought or belief structure, then I need to repeat the switch, right? So that means that I need to repeat when I'm having the negative thought and flipping it to the one I want to replace it with. And so you can do this with triggers, for instance. Once you become aware of the behavior that you want to change, or the thought process that you want to change, there's usually a physiological response associated, meaning that it could be there's going to be some resistance. Once you identify a behavior and then you still engage in that behavior, you're going to have some resistance to it. So this could be flush in the face, your heart rate may increase, your breath rate may increase or become shallow. So this physiological response to the behavior or to the thought that you are trying to change, thought process, can be your trigger to to replace it with a new one. So immediately thinking of the new thought or belief that you want to instill. And so over time, as you do this over and over, this can replace the old subconscious program. So another powerful way to replace subconscious programs is through a shift in perception. So what I mean by that is the way that we perceive things is how we experience it, and that becomes a truth, a belief for us, right? So again, going back to my example of work, you have to work hard to succeed. That was my perception because that is what I witnessed as a child, is if you work hard, you get rewarded with success. If you don't work hard, you can't have success, right? That's what I witnessed as a child in my environment. Now, because I'm changing that, I'm perceiving success in a different lens. So I'm perceiving that that success does not need to be stressful. Success can actually be tied in with ease because I am witnessing and I'm choosing to find things that I can witness that will change my perception to really truly believing that this is true. So another way to shift perception, and something that I know you are interested in talking about, a really powerful way to shift your perception and think in a new way, especially about things in your life that you may not view as positive in the moment, is using psychedelics, right? So that is a big action in psychedelics is decreasing the activity, the normal activity of the prefrontal cortex. This is our filtration system. This is where we perceive. This is where the ego lies, right? So if we can shut that down, not necessarily shut it down because it's always running, but if we can lower or take away that filter or even slightly remove that filter, then we can see things through a new lens, through a new perception. And this can really powerfully change a subconscious program even faster than repetition.
That's great. And let's open a bracket here. We're not encouraging people to take psychedelics, right? So always, do based on your state you live and, follow the law and blah, 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 blah. Sorry, it has to be said. But in the meantime, at the same time, I think if we know something through science, they have to be mentioned. So we do not encourage it, but if we got, studies about it and so on, it's very good to be mentioned it. So shift.
Absolutely.
And so repetition and shift in perception, you say that can be made faster through psychedelics.
Yeah, so shifting perception definitely does not need to happen through psychedelics, but psychedelics can be a very powerful way to do this. And the reason why is the neurochemistry and the neural action of psychedelics. And so you're exactly right. I am not recommending this to anyone. But out of the research that's coming out of Johns Hopkins University and out of the MAPS organization, which is the largest global organization that's doing research on psychedelics in a clinical setting under the supervision of a medical provider, they are seeing these huge perceptual shifts that are responsible for the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics.
That's great. And were they trying something in particular on those studies?
The main focus in the recent research is a couple of things. So psilocybin, psilocybin, LSD, and ayahuasca, which is it's eluding me right now.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So ayahuasca, the active chemical, it will come to me. I don't know why it is eluding me right now. But anyway, all three are serotonergic hallucinogens. So again, going back to that serotonergic system in the brain, which is responsible for mood regulation. So all of these serotonergic hallucinogens, it really doesn't matter what one. Of course, it does depend on how it is administered in a clinical setting, but they all have a very similar action, which is to change the activity in the prefrontal cortex to cause these major perceptual shifts.
That is amazing. And do they increase the activity of serotonin?
They modulate the activity of serotonin. So it's kind of like a adaptogen for your brain, because it will it can increase if an increase is needed or decrease if a decrease is needed. So it's really helps to bring the nervous system into balance. Now, that being said, if psychedelics are not used in a safe setting under the supervision of a trained professional, it can do the opposite. If you have a very scary or triggering or traumatic experience, and you don't feel safe, it can have the opposite effect.
It can have the opposite effect because obviously you are you're having a shift in perception, right? If you're like rewiring, pardon for my pronunciation. If you are rewiring your subconscious thoughts and so on, the rewiring can be done in a positive way or in a negative way. So this is why. That's
true. Yes.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that. It's good to be under the supervision. I need to be very mindful all the time because I know I'm going over as well. Even though I have a million questions for you.
Yes.
I've got two very last questions for you.
Okay.
One is the sorry, it's
Kitty's back.
She loves you.
I'm a cat person. That's why she does.
If you listen to my episode, there is always like a Bagheera, that's their name, appearance to my episode. How much do you know about psilocybin and depression? My first question. And the second question is not 100% related, but so when you want to reprogram your subconscious mind and so on, obviously you have a will to do so. And that's very important because you know that you want to be a better person and you have a will to do so. What do you reckon would be the best approach when you want to help someone else to reprogram certain beliefs? And I'm personally thinking about my mom, about certain things, and everyone's got his own person or the person who wants to help. But you will know probably better than me that when someone has, especially an older person, I don't want to be discriminatory here, but when someone has certain beliefs plus do not have the will power to and the will to change them, and they are so tied to their beliefs, it's very difficult. You cannot just say, hey, do this, it will be good for you. Do you have suggestions for those type of scenarios?
Yeah, so I'll start with your second one. And I think this is something that we have all experienced where we really want to help a person. We know what's good for them and they won't make the change, right? Unfortunately, nobody can make a decision for somebody else to change a neural pathway or to change a subconscious program. Yeah. It will never work. The person has to decide it for themselves. And the best way to influence somebody to do that is not by telling them to. It's by modeling the behavior that you want them to adopt. Because if they can view it through the action of mirror neurons, they can experience it in some capacity for themselves. And this may end up being the perceptual shift that they need to change the belief structure that is causing them to act in a way that you don't necessarily like or that is not healthy for them, right? So the best way is to model the behavior without pushing them into doing something that they don't want to do or that they're not ready. So suggestion is be a model for the behavior, but don't be tied to the outcome, because then you're just going to set yourself up for disappointment, and then that can have a negative impact on your own physiology. And so back to the other question about psilocybin specifically and depression. So what they're finding in this research that's going on is through Johns Hopkins and MAPS and other big universities in Canada and in the US is that treatment resistance depression is effectively treated with psilocybin treatment in a clinical setting. So it's somewhat of a higher dose. And I'm not 100% positive on the protocol, so I won't explain that. But you can go to maps.org and they share all their protocols that they use. But what they're finding is in a really, really high efficacy that these experiences under the guidance of a therapist and with the proper integration period can be highly, highly effective in treating depression, especially if the depression is resistant to the current treatment that they're on.
That's very interesting. What was the website again? Maps.org?
Yes, maps.org. And you can look at all the really fascinating research that they have going on. And Johns Hopkins recently received a few $1 million to do this research on psilocybin specifically for both depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And the results and the findings are pretty incredible.
It is exciting. It's definitely a very interesting field. It is very interesting when you use new substances to make new studies. A different approach on stuff is very, very fascinating. Kayla, I want to really thank you so much for being here. And honestly, I recommend to anyone who is listening to this episode to go on your page. I think so far I've been lucky enough to interview a lot of amazing people. You all have these things in common that, you are all very kind. You all have a great passion for what you do. I truly believe that your Instagram page is one of the best starting point for many people, and I truly believe that everyone produces a lot of content, but you do it, first of all, a ton of content. Like your stories are always like your purple circle around your story is always active, and content and your skill is to translate this content into for anyone to understand. So and on top of that, you also have a podcast. So how can people find out? Feel free to tell anyone how can find out more about you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So as you mentioned, I love and put a lot of passion and energy into my Instagram page, which is primarily a health science education page, a lot about neuropsychophysiology. If you're into that, you'll like it. So that page is at biocurious_Kayla. Also on Instagram, you can check out the podcast page, which is at biocurious_podcast. But if you search Biocurious on any of the podcast platforms, wherever you listen, Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcast, wherever you listen, it's there. Just search Biocurious and you'll find it. We have 82, I think it'll be 83 episodes as of tomorrow. So lots of great content and really, really inspiring guests who have taught me a lot in their specific fields of expertise. So if you're interested in those conversations, definitely head over there and check that out. I have an online community that is a monthly membership. It's very cheap. It's only $8 a month, and it is where you can go to connect with like-minded individuals in the space, but also download all kinds of biohacking guides and content and information and research. So it's kind of like a resource exchange type of thing, and that's at biocurious.co. And one last thing that I want to mention for any of the women listening I have just released with a couple of amazing, also female colleagues who are scientists and health experts within the field. We have released what's called the Power Program for Women. So it's POWHER program. And if you check out powerprogram.org, all the information is there, but this is a 1-year program for women that dives deep into a woman's biorhythms, biochemistry, neurochemistry, using laboratory testing to really optimize her health. So if you're interested in that, definitely check that out too.
And I love your work, honestly, like so much stuff to go through. Like I like that you're very active on that. Like it's amazing. I know a couple of people will ask me that. In fact, I had a couple of people who I know they're like good listeners of the podcast who asked me that. Do you do any type of consulting?
Yes, I do. So for health and wellness brands, and a lot of biotech is what I end up working in. I consult for them, bringing in the latest and most high quality research to infuse their brands with the science. So if anybody is interested in bolstering your brand, your offering with the science that supports what you're doing, I love to do that. And it's all about this science translation piece. I also, depending on the project, sometimes I take on research projects, doing novel research for companies, or helping to, again, do research that brings in the current evidence base for their product, service, or whatever it may be. On the other side, for individuals, I do work with a very, very small handful, only 5 at a time, individuals one-on-one for health optimization. And in that, we do laboratory testing, and we work on optimizing the metabolism and the gut and the brain through diet, exercise, and lifestyle medicine, and really shifting some of these behaviors around that.
That's amazing. Thank you. And then probably I'm going to ask you to send me all those links, because I want to make sure I link them in the show notes. Whoever is listening, check the show notes, because there's going to be all sort of links and additional info. And Kayla, thank you so much. And, for who everyone is listening, definitely go and check Kayla out. I mean, the pages and, not in that sense.
You can check me out. It's okay.
You can check her out. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to do the podcast. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thank you.
Hey there, thanks for listening. Before we conclude, I'd like to remind you something very, very important. This episode, as well as these podcasts in general, is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have. Please, if you have any medical condition, consult your physician first. Disclaimer given, I would love for you to subscribe to this podcast and to leave me a review. That will help me a lot. We're just starting out. We have already a lot of great interviews down the line, which you don't want to miss. So hit the subscribe button so you will get a notification for the next exciting episode. I'll see you next time.
Hey there! If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. In fact, I'm recording this from your phone right now. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many other platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And it's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. So go ahead, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.